M20. And in Oxfordshire, the A34 is closed northbound at the Marcham interchange at Abingdon after an accident, causing long delays. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5. It'd be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote because that's
not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this and they will just say enough because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment and obviously our houses are full of items we bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them from
that was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
I want to say, go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library. 9:30 on Tuesday, the 9th of April. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, on the run, new shocking details as the manhunt continues for Habiba Massoum, who is suspected of fatally stabbing a mother in Bradford. The manhunt continues, and this morning it's been revealed that he was on bail for allegedly threatening to kill the victim.
Yes, that's it. Despite the advice of prosecutors, he was released on bail and that manhunt continues to find Massoum.
The real-life Mr Bates versus the Post Office. This morning, former sub-postmaster Alan Bates finally goes before that public inquiry which started 4 years ago. He's going to reveal what happened at the inquiry for the first time.
And tackling tax dodgers to fund the NHS. It's a radical plan, but Labour claim they can fund the health service and education by simply clamping down on those who don't pay tax.
Yes, most of us pay our taxes properly, but there are big companies and quite a few individuals who really don't. Labour say if they're elected, they'll be able to claw back some $5 billion a year from tax dodgers, but it's much easier said than done.
And stop rushing kids to change gender. A landmark report will reveal very shortly that children who believe they are transgender may actually have mental health issues. So isn't it time we stopped allowing kids or even forcing them to make these life-changing decisions?
And scorching Britain, or is it? March, the hottest ever, apparently, and the 10th straight month to set a temperature record. Scientists claim it's due to climate change, and we need to act now, they say, with urgency. Do we? That very heated debate ahead. I don't know about rain, but the wind last night. I got very little sleep, whistled round the house, the windows were shaking.
Gale force.
Gale force winds. We're going to be having that debate shortly. I want to hear what you think as well this morning. Our news system is up and running, gbnews.com/your say. We will be interacting with you. Andrew and I can message you back when you message us live on air. We have to present the show at the same time, of course, so we may not always be back to you instantly. But get in touch, won't you? gbnews.com/your say. All that and more. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your headlines. A man suspected of stabbing a mother to death in Bradford was out on bail after allegedly making threats to kill her. The hunt is continuing across northern England today for 25-year-old Habibur Massam, a Bangladeshi national who came to Britain on a student visa. He is wanted on suspicion of murdering 27-year-old Kulsama Akhtar, who was stabbed as she pushed her baby in a pram while out shopping. Mr Massam was conditionally bailed by Manchester Magistrates Court in November. He pleaded not guilty to both assault and threatening to kill, and he was ordered not to contact Miss Akhtar. Labour is set to announce a new crackdown on tax avoiders today in a bid to help fund the NHS. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will pledge to raise over £5 billion per year, which Labour would use to tackle NHS waiting lists and fund free school breakfast clubs. The party has said it will also raise £2.6 billion over the next Parliament by closing loopholes in the government's plans to abolish exemptions for non-DOMs. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has met Donald Trump in Florida as he looks to shore up support for Ukraine. The two men discussed the war in Ukraine, NATO and the Middle East. It is the first summit between a senior government minister and the former president since he left office in 2021. The Post Office Horizon public inquiry resumes today, almost 4 years after it begun, with campaigner Alan Bates set to make his first appearance. The inquiry has been probing the circumstances that led the Post Office to wrongly prosecute more than 900 sub-postmasters caused by errors in the Horizon software system. Mr Bates will give his version of events ahead of appearances by senior executives from the Post Office and Fujitsu, which built the computer software at the heart of the scandal. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Sit down, Andrew.
I was looking for my pen.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think you could hear the shout. Sit down, Andrew.
Sorry about that.
Oh, thank you for joining us. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce occasionally sits down.
Yeah, I do. Now, we talked about this shocking murder yesterday. So the man suspected of stabbing the 27-year-old mother to death. Remember, she was pushed her with her 5-month-old baby and was actually on police bail for allegedly making threats to kill her. How could this have happened?
So Habibur Massam was conditionally bailed by Manchester Magistrates Court in November, and despite prosecutors objecting to his release at the time.
So, Kulsama Akhtar was stabbed as she pushed her baby in a pram while out shopping. The baby is unharmed. Our reporter, Anna Riley, is outside Bradford Police Station. Anna, there'll be serious questions to answer here about the decision to allow Massam to be released on bail.
There will, and good morning to you both, but just to bring you the latest on this that I've got, police that are investigating the death of Kulsama Akhtar have arrested a 25-year-old man on suspicion of her murder. He was arrested in the early hours of this morning in the Aylesbury area. They've thanked members of the public and the media for widely sharing appeals for information in relation to Kulsama's death. So just to repeat that, a 25-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Kulsama Akhtar, the man from Oldham, arrested in the early hours of this morning in the Aylesbury area. That's come just now from West Yorkshire Police, so that's the very latest on this case. It was 4 days into the manhunt for her murder, and that is the very latest that we've got so far.
OK, thank you, Anna. Well, if you are just joining us, that was breaking news. A 25-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the crime, the murder of this young mother who, as we said, was pushing her baby in a pram. Her name was Kulsama Akhtar. And as we just heard from Anna there, the police have arrested somebody. Right. To help us understand how this might work next is human rights lawyer David Hay. Good morning, David. Thank you very much for joining us. So you've heard that breaking news as well. We were going to talk to you about about the system here and how this gentleman, this man, no gentleman, would have been here on a visa, etc., in relation to his education. What happens now? They would appear they have arrested this man.
Good morning to you both. I mean, as you mentioned, and you know, more tragic news this morning or overnight of the murder, and you know, something that should have been very much avoidable. But good news that someone has been arrested. Obviously, we'll get more details of that in due course. So that's, you know, I think something that the police have done well in terms of obviously managing this quickly. But many questions I think raised into how this happened in the first place, how this gentleman, and again, I note your point on using the word gentleman, how this individual was here in the first place, and all the various things, and when we look at bail as well. So I think lots of questions that are going to need to be answered going forward.
OK, thank you, David. We're going to keep it brief because obviously a man has now been arrested and that pretty much changes the editorial policy under which we can operate. We will bring you up to speed with any of the details that we know. I am just logging on to gbnews.com/your say, where we're going to hear from you this morning. Please do get involved with our conversation. Up next, though, do we need to act now to save the planet from climate change? March, turns out, was the 10th consecutive month to break heat records. And scientists are worried. From what I could see, it just didn't stop raining in March, did it?
Yeah, right. and it's raining a lot now, too. It's
still raining and very windy.
However, that doesn't mean the water companies aren't already talking about hosepipe bans in summer, which will be an outrage.
Absolutely. We're going to be debating that. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
I wonder, is this the fundamental distinction we need to make between Islam, which is a private religion people may practice freely amongst themselves, and Islamism, when you try and place those values upon other people, place that way of being, force it on people who don't want it?
I have been very much clear about this thing, that Islam is a religion and people are free to follow that religion in the UK, in a free Western society. So we have no problem with people following their religion as long as it is not being imposed onto the wider society. And when you talk about drawing a distinction between Islam and Islamism, people like me, you and me, we are drawing that distinction. We're trying to maintain that distinction. But if you look at the commentator from the Muslim community, some commentator, they would like to blur this line and they would ask you, what is Islamism? Where does it exist? Sorry, it does exist. We see it. And the teacher, this incident is an epitome of that kind of, ideology being prevalent, in our society.
Khadija, do you worry that these views are typical for some sections of society? Do you think that there's a problem with some Muslim men, that they have perhaps views that we don't consider to be British values?
There are certain readings of religion which are misogynistic, which are discriminatory, which are homophobic. We need to be honest about it. We need to be calling it out whenever we hear these kind of views. It's been a long time that we are letting these kind of ideologies crawling in, spreading tentacles in British society, and we are just ignoring it in the name of respecting people's culture and religion. You are not suppressed in the UK.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
So just to recap that, breaking news, West Yorkshire Police has now confirmed a 25-year-old man has been arrested in Aylesbury on suspicion of the murder of the 27-year-old mother, Kulsuma Akhtar, in Bradford on Saturday. She was, of course, wheeling her 5-month-old child in her pushchair when she was stabbed to death.
OK, now, March, apparently, was the 10th straight month to set a new record for global heat, both in terms of air temperatures and ocean surface temperatures.
And, of course, many scientists are very worried about this because they say it's all down to climate change.
So should we all adjust our lifestyles now to try and save the planet? We are joined by the director of the Climate Media Coalition and friend of the show, Donoghay McCarthy, and the director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford, to join us to debate this. Now, gentlemen, do we all agree, first of all, that the planet is heating up? If the answer is yes, just nod. Yes. OK, good. We all agree that. What we maybe don't agree on, Andrew, is whether this is man-made climate change or just a natural phenomenon. Andrew?
I think there are both elements are in play. You know, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and will tend to warm the planet. It's very difficult to say anything from temperature records in particular. I mean, particularly surface temperature records, which are rather dodgy. You know, the past is always changing in the temperature records because they're always adjusting them. You know, it suggests that the data isn't very good. But yeah, I think there are many factors changing the temperature. But the idea that we have some sort of a climate emergency going on is frankly just scaremongering. It's a fairy story. The things aren't getting worse at all. If you actually look at the official reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they find almost no changes in any meteorological phenomena at all, apart from heat waves and average temperatures, pretty much. Those are the only ones. Oh, and ocean temperatures is the other one. But all these things that we're led to believe, you're showing pictures of forest fires at the moment. Forest fires aren't getting worse, they're getting better. Fire weather is not getting worse. Hurricanes are not getting worse. Floods are not getting worse. And on and on and on. It is absolutely astonishing just how many meteorological phenomena the IPCC says they can't find any meaningful trends in. So we need to get away from this idea that we're in an emergency. And this is causing great damage to society because we are making very foolish policy decisions based on scaremongering. And scaremongering is always a poor basis for policy.
OK, and Donoghay, that's what you're good at. You do the scaremongering. This is all your fault.
Sorry, Bev, that's not fair. I come in with science. And actually what Andrew Montford comes on with US-American billionaire-funded propaganda. He is a national security risk to the United Kingdom. He is funding an effort to stop Britain acting to protect its national security. He's just, the lies about flooding are extraordinary. The Meteorological Society, the Met says, for every 1 degree rise in temperature, we have a 7% rise in rainfall. That's exactly what is happening in Britain. You talk to any farmers whose fields have been flooded for the last 6 months, when we had 200% more rain this winter than normal. Speak to those farmers and ask them, is there an emergency? It's absolutely outrageous. What Britain needs to do is ignore people like Andrew who are propagandists for the oil industry and actually do two things. Britain needs to invest in renewable energy and stop the banks investing in new fossil fuels which are damaging Britain. And secondly, we need to stop insuring the global industry with new fossil fuels. If we tackle that one thing, Britain could make a huge contribution to this effort to protect ourselves.
But a huge contribution, what, compared to China, Donaghy? I mean, it's minuscule what we can do, minuscule, and
Yes,
while
Andrew,
China's doing nothing to cut pollution.
Andrew, I didn't talk about Britain's emissions, which are 1% of global emissions. Yes, you're right. China is 20 times bigger than Britain, so its emissions are 20 times bigger than ours. However, Britain is responsible for 15% of global investments in new fossil fuels and 50% of the global markets in fossil fuel insurance. So we are we're the second largest center of the fossil fuel industry in the world, and that gives us responsibility to act, and we're rich enough to act. And the positive thing, Andrew, is renewable energy is cheaper, and investing in the insulation for people's homes makes their bills cheaper. So it's a win-win-win.
Andrew Montford, are you bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry?
Well, every time I come on GB News up against Donaghy, he says you're funded by big oil. He's never actually said which oil company funds us, because he doesn't know who funds us, because we deliberately don't.
Look at DSMOG, look it up in DSMOG, and they'll see the evidence.
Okay.
The journalism's been done.
Tell me which oil company funds me. Come on, let's hear it.
I asked the viewer to look at these markets. It's actually the American. It's very clear. The American oil billionaires fund the global warming policy.
Name one. Come on, name the oil company. Come on.
I'm asking every viewer here to look up the report on these one. They will list the
Donaghy, hang on.
oil billionaires who fund you.
Donaghy, you made a very serious charge that he's in the pay of oil companies. Andrew's entitled for you to name the oil company that's paying him.
What I said is oil billionaires are funding him, and actually, if you look up on the DSMOG,
you're not very convincing.
I don't have the names found. Andrew, look up the DSMOG report.
No, you've got to tell us the evidence. You've got to support your claims.
I have. I've given you the direct link to the list of names. I don't have the names off my head right now. I can provide them to you, but I can give you the evidence. And what I will say, Andrew, is, do you think it's right that Britain's policy should be directed by a think tank that won't declare who their funders are? If Andrew can declare his funders, great. Then he should be allowed here on to speak. But
go on then, Andrew Montford. Andrew Montford, who does fund your think tank?
We don't identify our funders because for two reasons. One, it would be illegal to do so. It's illegal under the Data Protection Act. You can't give out people's private financial information in public without their permission. We don't prevent people from identifying themselves as our funders, but it's essentially people in the cities and charitable foundations.
Here's the thing, Andrew. If you genuinely believed in what you're saying, Andrew Montford, you should be able to declare who pays you to say that, and also be able to stand up your evidence. I think anybody on both sides of the fence, because there are also a lot of people. The green net zero agenda is very profitable to some people as well, Donaghy, isn't it? So money is being traded on both sides of this debate.
Absolutely, and thankfully, green energy is profitable and it is cheap. But I think you make a very serious point. If Andrew just said another lie, he actually said he's not allowed to say who his funders are. How come every other think tank is allowed to say who their funders are? If you go to most of the progressive and renewable energy think tanks, they list on their website who funds them. Why doesn't Andrew do it?
Go on, Andrew, because you can do both. The two aren't mutually exclusive. You can confess or admit who funds you whilst also standing by your argument.
OK, so if they're individuals, you are not allowed to name them because the Data Protection Act says you're not allowed to give out people's private financial information.
But why aren't they willing to do it themselves?
If they're willing to do it themselves, we have no problem with them doing that.
But why aren't they, Andrew? OK,
because the first thing that will happen is that they will get a load of Just Stop Oil people round on their offices, spray painting them with paint. We've had our offices spray painted more than once. And so, yeah, of course, people don't want that sort of harassment. I mean, there is a lot of thuggery around the green movement. And so, yeah, they will vandalize your offices. So, yeah, why would people expose themselves to that? I mean, yeah, Donaghy maybe has a bit.
That's actually something different from what you actually told, what the Global Warming Policy Foundation told the media 2 or 3 years ago. One of the reasons they gave for not revealing who was funding them, he said their children would be horrified that they couldn't face their children, look their children in the eye and say they're funding you guys. Look, the problem, let's get back to the actual issue, is the threat to Britain from these global, and the science. I mean, you're actually right, Bev. Let's look at the science. And I'm not talking about the science from climate activists or climate scientists. I'm talking about the science from oil companies. The oil company scientists in the 70s and 80s, their own scientists told them if they did not stop promoting fossil fuel expansion, what is happening right now in the planet of increasing temperatures, increasing rainfall, will be a threat to our civilization. Their own scientists said it.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Very
Donahue
lively.
McCarthy and the director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford. Very lively and always illuminating.
Yeah, very interesting. Andrew Montford was on strong ground because Donahue couldn't name the oil companies funding him, but then wouldn't tell us who was funding him. And the people who are funding him, if you get some tin of paint over you from Just Stop Oil, too bad.
Quite right. OK, we want to hear what you think. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Here are all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
Right, I'm going to have a look at what you've been saying at home. Now, if you were tuned in yesterday, you'll know that I was actually registered as my father because that was my GB News membership I signed my dad up.
No, we think
Hello, Dad.
We think she's secretly transitioning. We've got this suspicion.
It was not deliberate. So I am now just logging in. It is very easy. We would love to see you do the same thing this morning. Let us know what you thought about that, particularly that debate on the environmental issues. And actually, I thought what Donahue said, or one of them said, about the fact that there is thuggery on both sides of that debate.
There is.
Any of these big issues are always, there's always thuggery on both sides.
I think Just Stop Oil have just lumped a load of paint over one of the political parties' offices in the last 24 hours.
Jonathan pointing out that a lot of green activists receive funding from China and Russia as well.
That's right.
And Gary says net zero tax is OK for the people who can afford it. Talking of weather, here's Annie with it.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to be a very windy day for some of us today. There are rain and wind warnings in force, and it's also going to be feeling a lot cooler than yesterday, particularly across the east. There's an area of low pressure with a wristband of rain wrapped around it. That's bringing the wet and windy weather to many areas. The strongest winds will be across western coast through this afternoon. That's where we've got the wind warning in force, parts of Wales, northwest England, but also the south coast seeing some very strong and gusty winds. That could bring travel disruption, but it's the rain across parts of Scotland that will likely bring some flooding issues and delays on the roads, trains as well. It will be feeling much colder as well than yesterday. Highs only of around 13 or 14 degrees after temperatures reached the mid-teens through yesterday. However, through tonight, it does turn a lot drier across the country. That area of low pressure pushes away to the east, and we have a ridge of higher pressure that will bring much drier, clearer conditions throughout this evening. However, that's going to let temperatures drop down, so we could see a touch of frost in rural areas by Wednesday morning, but it is going to be a much drier and brighter start to the day on Wednesday. Should stay largely dry on Wednesday across eastern areas, particularly across southeastern England. But further west, the cloud will thicken through the day. Rain will arrive across parts of Wales and the southwest through the morning. And that will push into parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England, Scotland, where it will really linger and turn quite persistent and heavy. There's a rain warning in force for many western areas of Scotland. So here we could see some delays and disruption from the rain. But temperatures will be around average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. Now, buses replaced trains between Portrush and Coleraine because of a faulty train. There's a reduced rail service on a number of rail routes in England today too because of industrial action. Now, the A1 in Tyne and Wear is partly blocked where a vehicle caught fire on the roundabout at junction 66 by the Angel of the North. Isle of Man steam packet services are suspended between Duckless and Heysham because of poor weather conditions. On the M62 in Cheshire, 2 lanes are closed eastbound for an investigation between junctions 10 and 11 from the M6 at the Croft interchange to Birchwood, causing queues. And on the M25 in Essex, there's a lane closed anti-clockwise at junction 29 for the A127 after an accident, causing roughly 2 miles of queues towards there. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is your chance to win our biggest prize of the year so far. First, there's a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then, we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Tuesday, the 9th of April. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Well, the real-life Mr Bates versus the Post Office, it's coming now. Any moment now, the former sub-postmaster, Alan Bates, will reveal his side of the story as he appears at that Post Office public inquiry for the very first time.
Tackling tax dodgers to fund the NHS. It's a radical plan, but Labour claim that they can fund the health service and education by clamping down on those who don't pay tax.
Yes, Labour says that this money would fund more appointments, GP appointments, and also breakfast clubs, free breakfast clubs for school children. They estimate they can bring in £5 billion a year by the end of the next Parliament, but it's much, much easier said than done.
And breaking news, police have arrested a 25-year-old man from Oldham on suspicion of murder after the mother Cosima actor was stabbed in Bradford while she was wheeling her 5-month-old child in a pushchair.
And youth demands first strike. We brought you this story just last week. 11 people have been arrested following a pro-Palestinian protest at the Labour Party's headquarters. What will the group do next?
They've been dubbed an unholy alliance of militant Gaza protesters and environmentalists. They stroked yesterday. I'll have all the reaction from that event and some information on their future plans.
Yeah, so Charlie broke that story last week about this coalition of these two protest groups. I didn't expect their first target to be Labour headquarters.
It'll be because they're not pleased that Labour have not been robust enough about a ceasefire in Gaza. That will be the problem. And remember, there was the big row over the vote that was pulled by the Speaker. That was going to lead to a huge Labour rebellion. And there's a number of independent Muslim candidates standing against Labour in very strongly Labour-held seats. So this is still a sign that this war is a problem for Labour.
Yeah, well, we'll find out from Charlie in just a moment. Don't forget to get onto our website, gbnews.com/your say, for live comments that we will be reading. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. First is some breaking news in the last half hour. Police say they have arrested a suspect in a murder investigation after a mother was stabbed to death while pushing her baby in a pram. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed on Westgate in Bradford. Police then launched a manhunt to search for a suspect. A 25-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder. Labour is set to announce a new crackdown on tax avoiders today in a bid to help fund the NHS. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will pledge to raise over £5 billion per year, which Labour would use to tackle NHS waiting lists and fund free school breakfast clubs. The party has said it will also raise £2.6 billion over the next Parliament by closing loopholes in the government's plans to abolish exemptions for non-DOMs. Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray says it's wrong that some people are getting away without paying what they owe.
We're setting out our plans today to crack down on that tax avoidance and to get that money into the public purse because, you know, when people right across Britain are paying more and more tax, we think it's wrong that a minority are getting away without paying what they owe. We've been setting out for a number of years about ending non-dom tax status. The government said they wanted to follow our lead after years of saying they wouldn't. But they're leaving open loopholes in that, which means that people can avoid paying hundreds of millions of pounds of tax. So we want to close those loopholes. But that's part of a broader approach to investment in HMRC.
The Foreign Secretary has met Donald Trump in Florida as he looks to shore up support for Ukraine. Lord Cameron's meeting with Mr. Trump follows reports claiming the former US president said he could end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours if he was re-elected. The two men discussed the war in Ukraine, NATO and the Middle East. It is the first summit between a senior government minister and the former president since he left office in 2021. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary will hold talks with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington, D.C. The Post Office Horizon public inquiry resumes today, almost 4 years after it began, with campaigner Alan Bates making his first appearance. The inquiry has been probing the circumstances that led the Post Office to wrongly prosecute more than 900 sub-postmasters caused by errors in the Horizon software system. Mr. Bates is giving his version of events ahead of appearances by senior executives from the Post Office and Fujitsu, which built the company's software at the heart of the scandal. The Tory MP at the centre of the Westminster honey trap has reportedly resigned from his position as the vice chair of the 1922 committee. It follows William Ragg claiming he was manipulated into sharing other politicians' personal numbers as part of a Westminster sexting scam. He has since apologised, prompting the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to call him courageous for coming forward. Scotland Yard says it's continuing its investigation into the scam after major security concerns were raised by several members of Parliament. The government says up to £11 million from water company fines will be reinvested in schemes to improve waterways and wetlands. The Water Restoration Fund, which has now opened for applications, will offer grants to local groups, charities, farmers and landowners to help them improve rivers, lakes and streams where illegal pollution has occurred. It's the latest move by the government to crack down on water company pollution in the face of growing public anger over the state of England's rivers and coastal waters. Millions of people across America have witnessed a rare total solar eclipse. Areas of Mexico and the US were plunged into darkness as the moon passed in front of the sun, leaving crowds in awe of the phenomenon. Meanwhile, back in the UK, many were hoping to see a partial eclipse as well, but heavy cloud cover left many keen spectators disappointed. And campaigners are calling on the government to ban 25 pesticides which contain so-called forever chemicals after the potentially harmful toxins were found in more than half of food and drink samples. PFA chemicals are long-lasting toxins which have been linked to serious health issues were found in more than 3,300 samples tested by the UK government in 2022. Out of all the items tested, strawberries were found to be the worst affected, as 95% of the 120 tested samples contained PFAs. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
(10:07), you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, the Post Office Horizon public inquiry resumes today, almost 4 years after it began with campaigner...
Unbelievable, isn't it? 4 years already.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. With campaigner Alan Bates set to make his first appearance any moment now. He is, of course, the star of the ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office.
We've talked now to the Conservative MP for North Norfolk, who is, of course, a former sub-postmaster himself, Duncan Baker. Duncan, morning. 4 years,
morning.
And yet we hear there's probably another 2 years to go. Why on earth does it take so long in this country to get these public inquiries done and dusted?
Well, it's a problem, isn't it? And we see it time and time again with just about every scandal of this magnitude. And of course, the real problem is, Andrew, there hasn't been many scandals of this magnitude. The amount of evidence that they're sifting through, you've got to remember, it is quite literally thousands of sub-postmasters who have been caught up with this scandal. And that takes an awful long time to go through. But this week should be a real turning point. It's Blockbuster who is now up to give evidence. And of course, Alan Bates this morning is going to be something which I think a lot of us have waited to see, and something that, is going to keep the nation gripped again. But I hope at the end of it, we really start to uncover quite what has happened.
But there isn't an awful lot to uncover anymore, is there, Duncan, really? It's pretty simple. Sub-postmasters working hard, running their businesses in their community, stitched up by a faulty IT system run by Fujitsu, which we now know. I mean, this isn't a criminal trial going on here. This is just working out what happened. So what are they looking at? What are they having to sift through? Seems very simple to me, and taxpayers' money are paying for this inquiry.
That is a simplistic way to put it, Bev, and of course you're not wrong. The bit that I think we really do want to start to see is just who knew what within the Post Office organisation. It's the individuals now. And what we're going to start to see is former chief execs actually being questioned. Now, they are the people, I think, who did know what was going on. For instance, the real evidence, I think, is that Horizon had a backdoor into it. People were able to, in Fujitsu, change sub-postmasters' accounts without them knowing. And of course, all of that has always been shrouded in mystery. Well, I want to know who did know what, because if they did know about that, and there is absolute concrete evidence that those accounts were being changed and those executives knew, and yet we've still allowed these poor individuals to be prosecuted when they knew the figures could have been manipulated, that is a real turning point. To this date, we still don't know exactly who knew what, and I think that's where we're trying to get to.
And when we begin to get to that point, Duncan, one of your colleagues, Nadeem Zahawi, said there has to be, at the very least, criminal prosecutions, because we know at least 4 sub-postmasters have taken their own lives, marriages have broken up, people have gone to jail, they've lost their lives, their reputations. And people knew what was going on. They knew when these prosecutions were taking place that there was a central lie in these prosecutions, which was that only the postmasters could access that Horizon IT system. That was a lie. The Post Office knew it. Fujitsu knew it.
Yeah, I believe you're right. I've said it in Parliament many times before. We always seem to get to another crescendo with a new piece of legislation being passed. The latest one was to be able to quash convictions to hurry up and speed the compensation up, and everyone goes, hurrah, we're moving forward. I've said time and time again on the record, we will not get closure on this until individuals who knew what was happening face criminal prosecutions. Now, I don't know who those individuals are, but I have a pretty good bet that they would be not only at Fujitsu, but also obviously within the Post Office hierarchy as well. And it is until we get to that position, Andrew, that I think we will only then start to see some closure. So what Nadeem Zahawi is calling for, and I noticed that the Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, has also said the same thing. I've been making that claim for quite a period of time as well. That has to happen. We've had 5 sub-postmasters who have now taken their lives. And until we'll never, ever recompense people that have lost absolutely everything. Of course, to everybody watching this has a particular personal meaning to me. I wasn't caught up with it. I must stress in 2014-15, when I was a sub-postmaster, most of the problems were then eradicated in the Horizon software. But to those friends and colleagues before me, we won't get closure until prosecutions and sentences actually are handed out, because this is a miscarriage of justice of the wider scale within the British system, but that has particularly been portrayed from the boardroom, and I think that is the real problem with all this.
And are key protagonists forced to turn up, Duncan? Are you compelled to attend?
You'd have to ask a clever lawyer. I'm not. I'm just a former accountant and sub-postmaster, Bev. But I suspect it would be pretty poor form if these people who are being asked to turn up don't turn up. It's not a. I don't think they have to by a law. But
the frustration, the frustration though, because we can see our inbox lighting up with this. So the frustration for the taxpayer is, so this inquiry started in 2021. It will run until 2026. We need to have learnt whatever lessons now so that we're not making the same mistakes. What do you think of the fact that Fujitsu are lined up to get the contract to run the UK's digital ID system, for instance? If they have been seen to be acted inappropriately here, potentially illegally, we need to stop them getting any future contracts, don't we? Now.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Of course, there's total common sense. There needs to be some actual punishment handed out. Now, on the one hand, again, something I've called for many times is that they should be made to contribute towards the compensation, and that is an ongoing conversation, which from the dispatch box, the Minister has said many times they will do that. But equally, we have to recognise that the position they're in with getting government contracts. Now, let me just caveat that. It is not easy on every street corner to find a multinational corporation capable of delivering IT services to the tune of what Fujitsu can deliver. Yes, of course, there are other competing businesses that can do it, Microsoft, Oracle, and the like. But it is not something that is 10 a penny. So I have some degree of understanding, but please don't shoot me down when I say I recognise the problems with this. Again, it is all about that nuance and balance, but there should be some kind of rectification that, this sort of scale of problem has occurred and somebody gets away with it scot-free. And that's why, as I keep repeatedly saying, we have to get to the criminal proceedings. But we won't be there yet.
Yeah, we're short on time, but I have to say I disagree. I think Fujitsu should never be allowed to have a government contract again because they got this IT system so wrong, and it's quite clear they must be involved in some way in the duplicity and deception which has led to this terrible position for people like Alan Bates. So in which case, why would they ever be allowed to get a public contract again?
Well, that may be the case, but you are dealing with individuals probably the best part of 20 years ago now, Andrew, and what's the shape of the organisation today? That is where we're going with this. We'll have to find out how it goes.
Duncan, always lovely to see you. Thank you so much. MP for North Norfolk and former sub-postmaster Duncan Baker. But that's the point. He's saying, well, it was 20 years ago. People have moved on. That's the point. People will move on again. We need to get these things sorted, done, dusted.
Well, 2026, how many more sub-postmasters will have died by 2026?
Well, quite. How many of the key protagonists will have died by then? I mean, you have to sort these things out now and have justice.
And we did see Paula Vernels, the former chief executive, who is accused of knowing a lot about this, refusing to talk to the media. She left church, I noticed the other day. She is, of course, a former part-time vicar. Pray to the Lord, Miss Vernels.
Right, we're going to bring you Alan Bates live when he appears at that inquiry this morning. But still to come, the government has backed the decision to let Russian athletes compete at Paris in 2024.
No.
I think that's the right decision. They're not the ones dropping the bombs. They're the ones who've done the training.
No.
We'll be discussing that in just a minute. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m. SUV drivers in Oxford will face higher parking charges. Proposals tabled by the local Green Party or passed by the City Council. The motion argues that heavier cars like SUVs cause more damage to roads, are more likely to seriously injure or kill pedestrians and cause more illnesses due to pollution. However, the Alliance of British Drivers has condemned the plan as absolutely outrageous. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the legendary motoring journalist, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We hear a lot about the war on motorists, this time targeting SUVs because of their weight, and the charges could be astronomical. This idea first started in Paris. Now it's coming to Oxford. Can you tell us a bit about how it would work?
OK, so the idea is that the charges will penalise people who drive heavier SUVs and I guess by implication electric cars, although Oxford Council haven't said exactly what they're going to do with EVs. But this is all based around this notion of SUVs being heavier than passenger cars, therefore wearing out the roads more. Now, there was a study, I've got it here in front of me, from the University of Edinburgh in 2022 that said real-world tests found that overwhelmingly the wear is caused by large vehicles, buses, heavy good vehicles. Road wear from cars and motorcycles is so low that this is immaterial. Now, obviously, driving around a medieval city like Oxford in an SUV isn't the brightest thing in the world to do. But the idea that we should penalise the owners of these cars based on imperfect science that's been read on social media, I think is completely wrong.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 10:19. You're with Britain's Newsroom and GBNews, Andrew Pearson, Beb Turner. We have in the panel the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Colville Ranger, and our very favourite GB News senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson.
Is he the only senior political commentator?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Oh, well, that's why you're our favourite.
Very territorial. Yeah. If he wasn't, I wouldn't have said he was the favourite.
We've got some junior ones as well,
Yeah,
but they're not quite of the standard of Nigel Nelson. Right. Labour are going to mount an inheritance tax raid on wealthy non-doms, Nigel, and this is going to solve everything. What are they going to do, and is it going to work?
Well, in a word, they're going to close the loopholes that Rishi Sunak left when he decided to nick Labour's policy to tax non-doms.
Right.
So the kind of things that happen is that it means that under a Labour government you'll have access to, for inheritance tax purposes, of estates that are abroad. If they're living and working in this country, but they have, say, trusts abroad or something like that, the idea is you'll be able to get the inheritance tax on that. They'll also not get a 50% discount for the first year they come here, so they will pay the full amount of tax.
I want to put two things to you. If this was such an easy way to raise some money, these non-dom stuff, why didn't Labour in 13 years in power close down these non-doms? Why didn't? Because I think there was a suspicion that if you go after the non-doms, they'll take their money elsewhere. Yeah,
I mean, there is. You never knew that tax would work. I mean, it only works provided the non-doms actually stay here.
Yeah.
The reason that it's come up now is that there was a study by Warwick University and the London School of Economics, and that suggested only 100 non-doms would actually leave the country as a result of this. Everybody else would stay. Now, we don't know that's true,
No,
but I mean, that was the estimate that was given, and on the basis of that, they're able then to put a figure on the amount the tax would raise.
I've got to say, I love academic studies that tell you whether, you know, business people who've been so successful will stay or not, depending on taxation. God, if we could only rely on those studies to tell us what will happen to the economy as well, economists and everything. But really, this is Labour being squeezed, because the Conservatives and Jeremy Hunt put his position on where he would go non-doms. He knows it's a delicate thing. The Conservatives knew how delicate it was from their principles and values to go after wealth creators. Let's be honest. Majority of these non-doms are creating jobs and the money that we need to generate the taxes to pay for the services that we want. And even Rachel Reeves this morning was being pushed about what is the objective you're trying to achieve here, and it's growing the economy. You don't get that by getting people
out wealth creators.
You don't. It's dancing on a pin and drilling down into this to fix a funding problem that Labour
And the
has.
Institute of Fiscal Studies, which is a respected think tank, says it's far from clear it's going to raise anything like the $5 billion, she says.
And that's exactly why the previous Labour government didn't do it. It's exactly why this Conservative government hasn't done it. But the opposition are currently squeezed into a position they don't want to say they're going to raise taxes, because that'll just be, well, you know, we all know that's where you're going. The other thing they've done is say, if there's a magic money tree, there's the magic efficiencies tree, isn't there? With HMRC saying they could find $5.1 billion over a term.
This is the second part of it.
Yeah, because they're going to hire these tax investigators.
Yeah, they're going to spend $500 million to hire more tax inspectors, to clobber down more.
Not that much to get that many tax
That's the investment.
It would cost that, but what you're talking about is that you have these 5,000 investigators, and the idea is, according to the National Audit Office, if you close down the tax loopholes, you went after the dodgers, you could raise this extra $5 billion.
Could.
I'm afraid it's another could, yeah. I mean, where the non-doms weren't absolutely certain, how many times have we had crackdowns on tax
lost count. How many times have you written the story?
Well, exactly, yes.
You've got it on a save get on your computer.
Yeah, just change a few words around.
Treasury Minister launches crackdown on offshore tax.
The point here is that what are Labour trying to do? If they're trying to define what kind of political party, what kind of economic model they're going to use, this is not the way to do it. This is sort of saying, well, we're trying to fiddle about with non-doms, we're trying to fiddle about with efficiencies. Tell us exactly how you
why I think they did this in the first place. I think it was petty and spiteful. It was because Rishi Sunak's wife was revealed to be a non-dom. He's changed that status. I don't think it's unfair at all. And it was always being raised, and then they announce a tax to get the non-doms, and they can keep going on about the Prime Minister's wife, because you're going to keep going on about how rich he is.
I mean, the bit that was really nasty was when Jeremy Hunt nicked the money and used it for national insurance cuts, when he should have used it to actually help people. So,
well, national insurance cuts do help people.
Well, I mean, people actually would like to see NHS waiting list cut rather more than they would national insurance. The Labour plan, which is this will now fund...
Well, Labour aren't going to reverse those cuts in national insurance.
No, they're not. No, that's right. So this money, if it all works out, this would fund 2 million more NHS ops a year. Right. That's paid for by nurses and doctors being paid over £1 billion to work overtime. You'll get breakfast clubs in every primary school, and you'll get 700,000 more urgent dental appointments.
I think
unless the non-doms clear off.
And the non-doms clear off, and you don't find those efficiencies, and you find you've spent more money on...
the non-dom have got clever lawyers than the tax inspectors, HMRC are going to bring it.
Exactly, but also, Nigel, your point about NHS, more money for the NHS, even West Streeting has come out yesterday, and it's very much highlighting that this is not a money situation, it's about how you run the NHS, it's about how you get better services, how you get the private sector involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this question of, yes, we all want to see waiting lists come down, but there needs to be a root and branch change in how the NHS is administrated. So that money on the cutting of national insurance was the appropriate thing to do.
This is not sort of money to be just thrown at the NHS. The idea of this money is specifically targeted. You'll get doctors and nurses working evenings and weekends to cut the waiting list, because the estimation is you'll get 2 million extra ops a year. West Streeting's got a lot of other things.
Is he going to get GPs to work weekends too?
I don't know. It was not aimed at GPs.
No.
It's aimed at getting the
It was Labour's contract that allowed them to stop working weekends.
Well, I think that when we go back to Tony Blair, Tony Blair threw too much money at GPs and messed it around and never quite got a handle on what GPs were doing. I think that was a
we've got
mistake.
this government already doing things like Pharmacy First, which is getting additional appointments for people, taking the pressure off GP practice where possible, adding tens of thousands of appointments a month to people. So I think there are things happening right now that will deal with that without having to throw additional money at the situation, which I think is not the answer.
No, but what you're not doing is sufficiently bringing down the waiting lists. I mean, this would have a significant impact on waiting lists if you could do it. And the other bit that Wes Streeting was talking about yesterday is using spare capacity in the private sector. Not a very Labour thing to do.
No, very controversial.
But spare capacity in the private sector to carry out NHS ops. The government do a bit of this, but not enough of it. He wants to expand that.
Right, let's move on, gentlemen. William Ragg has stood down. This, of course, is the guy at the centre of this sexting scandal, in that
appalling person.
He was on a gay dating app, sent a photograph to somebody that was then
a stranger
going to be blackmailed by them. He'd never met this person, and in order to not be blackmailed, he handed over other people's phone numbers, other MPs' phone numbers. He's now stepped down, Culvey, from the 1922 committee role, and he's believed to have resigned as chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee. He should just walk away from politics completely, shouldn't he?
I'm sure he's in a difficult place at the moment personally. When you go through these things, it's not pleasant. He has obviously made some fundamental errors, and he'll need time, and he'll need support, and he'll need to be spoken to, given some good advice, because it's very hard to make that decision yourself when you're there.
If you were one of the MPs, though, if you were a lord and he'd given your number over to these people, would you be feeling quite so forgiving?
But it wasn't just MPs either. It was political. It was young researchers not being paid very much money, being dragged into this.
Yeah, good point.
It's a huge failure on his behalf, and it. You know, we've all lived in the Westminster bubble. The pressure there is excruciating.
It doesn't make you send...
but it does make you do silly things.
Naked pictures to people,
no,
well,
it's giving away the numbers of other people.
I think it was more the sort of, you know, the confidentiality, the trust that you have in your community. And I think he's breached that trust. So, yes, he has to take that.
He's also really stupid.
Yes, people, when they make mistakes, people are being very stupid, yes.
Really poor judgment, Nigel.
And I'm told, Nigel, the reason that he's not been suspended by the party is because of his mental health. He suffered from depression in 2022. I'm sorry, if they should suspend him, because he has implicated at least 20 people now in this blackmailer's web. Some fell for it, some resisted it. It was shocking.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is quite a bit of sympathy for him at Westminster, and one of the reasons...
Not from me.
Well, maybe not from you, but certainly from his fellow MPs. And that's the reason he hasn't been suspended and the whip taken away. I think it's absolutely right that he steps down from the 22 committee and from his select committee. I think that would be incompatible to carry on with that. But, I mean, the sympathy is he was conned, he made a huge mistake. It doesn't excuse the stupidity, and he must feel absolutely wretched at the moment.
And I'm sure, and he'd spoken to GBNews about 6 months to a year ago, actually, about the fact that he struggles with his mental health, and we can have compassion for him. I think you can do both. I think you can have compassion for him on the fact that he struggles with life in general, but this poor judgment, Culvey, of being blackmailable and corruptible in that way, I think is really concerning as somebody in that position.
You know, it's not just concerning about him, it's concerning for all parliamentarians, because we have a lot of parliamentarians of vastly different experience, backgrounds, which is the point of Parliament, and people are vulnerable. And I think we have to look at what support mechanisms we have, and because effectively, you know, as a new PF come in, you're kind of left to your own devices, and it's amazing the amount of vulnerability that people do have in Parliament. So I think this is a wake-up call for us about how
in fairness to him as well, although I don't feel very fair to him, when he first arrived, he's from Greater Manchester, he was 27, lonely, out of his depth, struggling with his mental health. And in fact, when he used to go back at the weekends, he'd stay with his parents because he was clearly struggling with the whole responsibility of it.
But where's the Prime Minister in this? I think for the sake of the other MPs who he has exposed and the other political workers...
He doesn't want to buy election.
Rishi Sunak should be getting involved and saying, you need to go. Even if it is with compassion for your mental health, you're not in a state to be in this position. Why is he not doing that?
Well, he is going. Bear in mind, he's going at the next election. Yeah. He's already announced that he's quitting.
But if he forced him out now, there'd be a by-election.
And I don't think the government wants another by-election. You know what it's like at the moment. By-election after by-election. In fact, people are getting tired of these because we know there's a general election coming. If we didn't know there was a general election coming, I think there might have been a different way of handling this.
But he should have made I think the Prime Minister should have made a statement on this story. I do think he should have made a
I think he has said something, but I can't remember
He said a few words yesterday.
It was bland.
I mean, the problem at the moment is we still don't know or have any real suspicion who's behind it.
No, exactly. Was it a foreign player? Was it Russia or China? Or was it somebody who was trying to make some money?
And there's rumours that it was targeting the conference season last year, which is another interesting way that people... Because the conferences, for those of us who've been for many conferences, are great events, highly social, very political, lots going on, lots of people mingling.
10,000 people.
If that's the kind of thing that's being targeted now, you know, we always have security at conferences, but this kind of activity, my dad considered would be going on.
OK, gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We could have been sat here for another half an hour, but you'll be back later. Culver, Nigel, thank you so much. Time for the news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. It's 10:32. Here are your headlines. Police say they have arrested a suspect in a murder investigation after a mother was stabbed to death while pushing her baby in a pram. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed on Westgate in Bradford. Police then launched a manhunt to search for a suspect. A 25-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder. Meanwhile, murder squad detectives are investigating after a woman was found stabbed to death in central London. The victim was discovered dead, having suffered multiple stab wounds in her home near Hyde Park. The Metropolitan Police say they have been working 24/7 to identify and arrest whoever may be responsible for the attack. Labour is set to announce a new crackdown on tax avoiders today in a bid to help fund the NHS. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will pledge to raise over £5 billion per year, which Labour would use to tackle NHS waiting lists and fund free school breakfast clubs. The party has said it will also raise £2.6 billion over the next Parliament by closing loopholes in the government's plans to abolish exemptions for non-doms. The Post Office Horizon public inquiry has resumed today, almost 4 years after it began, with campaigner Alan Bates making his first appearance. The inquiry has been probing the circumstances that led the Post Office to wrongly prosecute more than 900 sub-postmasters caused by errors in the Horizon software system. Mr Bates is giving his version of events ahead of appearances by senior executives from the Post Office and Fujitsu, which built the computer software at the heart of the scandal. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2662 and €1.1660. The price of gold is £1,867.84 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,959 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, we're going to cross over to the public inquiry now into the Post Office scandal, where lead campaigner and sub-postmaster Alan Bates, he of Mr Bates versus the Post Office, he's about to give evidence for the first time. And this flipping inquiry started 4 years ago.
The NFSP, in the letter, should that say from Colin Baker?
Yes, it should.
Dated the 13th of January, so cross out the words January 200 and put in the words Baker, the word Baker. Yes?
Yes, please.
And page 32. Paragraph 102. It says in my letter to Mr. O'Neill dated the 9th of September 2009, I think that should be 2004.
The original letter? Yes, it would be, yes, you're right.
Yes. So can that be corrected to 2004? Thank you. If you can turn to page 59, please, in the hard copy. Do we see your signature there?
Yes, you do.
And with those two typos corrected, are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bates. I'm not going to ask you questions about every aspect of your witness statement because it's long and detailed, and a copy of it will be uploaded to the inquiry's website today so the public can read it. Can I start? The statement can come down, please. Can I start with a little bit about your background? You tell us in your witness statement, it's paragraph 5, no need to turn it up, that before you became a sub-postmaster, you worked for 12 years in the heritage and leisure project management sector. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is it right that in the course of that work, you developed experience in electronic point-of-sale EPOS systems?
Yes, I did.
You developed experience in the development of site-specific business software and the provision of staff IT training?
That's correct.
To what extent, if any, did that background assist you when you became a sub-postmaster and were later required to work with the Horizon IT system?
I think when Horizon came in, I think I was quite positive about it because I knew what technology and these sorts of systems could do. So I was quite positive. But I found it a bit frustrating once the system was installed and we were operating. I found there were many shortcomings in the system. And knowing what these systems could do, it just seemed a bit of a lost opportunity.
You were a sub-postmaster, I think, between the 31st of March 1998 and the 5th of November 2003.
Yes.
By my reckoning, so a period of 5.5 years or so.
That's correct.
And by comparison, if you don't mind me saying, to other sub-postmasters, that's a relatively short period, isn't it?
It is.
Sorry,
it is, but it's due to Post Office, not to myself.
Quite. And also, I suppose, ironically, you spent more than 4 times that period campaigning.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And why has that been necessary?
Because, well, initially it was because Post Office terminated my contract, giving me 3 months' notice and not giving me a reason for doing so. Purely because, in my belief, is that I kept raising problems and concerns over its Horizon system due to a number of faults I'd found over the years.
You tell us in your statement that you spent that period of time seeking justice, accountability and redress for not just yourself and your wife, but also on behalf of a much wider group of people. Is that right?
Yes, I did. Once I'd started my individual little campaign in there, we found others along the way, and eventually we all joined up, and so the JFSA was born, and onwards went the campaign.
You say in your witness statement that you have dedicated this part of my life to this cause. Is that how it has seemed or felt? That firstly, that it's required dedication, but secondly, it's a cause.
Yeah, I think it's also stubbornness as well. But as you got to meet people and realise it wasn't just yourself, and you saw the harm and injustice that had been descended upon them, it was something that you felt you had to deal with. Sorry. It's something you felt you had to deal with. It's something you couldn't put down. And you had the support of the rest of the group in there as well. Sorry.
That's right. Do take a moment to clear the frog in your throat.
Yeah, I have, haven't I? Hopefully not a Welsh one. There we go. Sorry.
Talking of which, you ran a post office in North Wales.
I did.
What was the name of the post office, and in which town was it?
It's Craigerdon Post Office in Llandudno.
Just say that again.
Craigerdon Post Office in Llandudno.
What kind of post office?
Like me teasing him about those names.
Oh, I see. Okay.
What kind of post office was it?
It was it was a 3-position counter. In it was when we first bought the property, it was very much at the back of the property in there, and it was a bit run down. And it also had another side, a retail side to the business, which was a whole variety of things: crafts, knitting, haberdashery, a whole range of things. So for the first year or two, we just ran the business as it was and slowly developed it from there, putting on a big extension, updating a lot of the stock. But more importantly, we actually saw it as a big potential to grow the post office business. We brought it right to the front of the building, and with a large queuing area for people. Unfortunately, it seems what post offices need. And so we invested quite heavily in developing the post office, and that was at the time Horizon came in.
Thank you. And I think you and your wife, Suzanne, were 44 years old.
So that was Alan Bates just at the start of his evidence. You might think he might have been there a little sooner, but after his TV fame, he's being talked to by Jason Beer, who is one of the lawyers for the public inquiry. Rather ponderous lawyer, I would have said, if you didn't mind me saying so.
Ponderous. Funny how they can be ponderous when they're being paid by the hour, isn't it? That was what my blood was boiling. I was reading your comments as well as watching that here. Andrew got in touch to say there's no such thing as climate change. It's just about the seasons are changing. This is in relation to our debate earlier. As polarity is moving north and south poles, we're getting wetter or hotter. And
what we didn't get a chance to talk to Donahue about was that report which came out a couple of weeks ago showing that our climate emissions, our carbon emissions, if you remember, are down to the lowest since 1888.
Yes.
1888.
Yes. Oh, you are being extremely interesting here. Go onto our website, gbnews.com/your say, and we will be reading out more of your messages after this very
Keep them coming in.
break. And still to come, have you heard of youth demand? Well, no doubt you will do soon. They're a new group of protesters who plan to disrupt your life, but started with the Labour Party. No one saw that coming.
That's funny.
Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to be a very windy day for some of us today. There are rain and wind warnings in force, and it's also going to be feeling a lot cooler than yesterday, particularly across the east. There's an area of low pressure with a wristband of rain wrapped around it. That's bringing the wet and windy weather to many areas. The strongest winds will be across western coast through this afternoon. That's where we've got the wind warning in force for parts of Wales, northwest England, but also the south coast seeing some very strong and gusty winds. That could bring travel disruption, but it's the rain across parts of Scotland that will likely bring some flooding issues and delays on the roads, trains as well. It will be feeling much colder as well than yesterday. Highs only of around 13 or 14 degrees after temperatures reached the mid-teens through yesterday. However, through tonight, it does turn a lot drier across the country. That area of low pressure pushes away to the east, and we have a ridge of higher pressure that will bring much drier, clearer conditions throughout this evening. However, that's going to let temperatures drop down, so we could see a touch of frost in rural areas by Wednesday morning, but it is going to be a much drier and brighter start to the day on Wednesday. Should stay largely dry on Wednesday across eastern areas, particularly across southeastern England. But further west, the cloud will thicken through the day. Rain will arrive across parts of Wales and the southwest through the morning. And that will push into parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England, Scotland, where it will really linger and turn quite persistent and heavy. There's a rain warning in force for many western areas of Scotland. So here we could see some delays and disruption from the rain, but temperatures will be around average.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think.
I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. So just to recap on the breaking news at the start of today's show, West Yorkshire Police have confirmed that a 25-year-old man from Oldham has been arrested in Aylesbury on suspicion of the murder of 27-year-old Kulsama Akhtar in Bradford on Saturday.
Now, 11 protesters have been arrested after a pro-Palestinian demonstration at the Labour Party HQ in London.
That's right. The group known as Youth Demand covered the inside and the outside of the building in red paint. They claim that they are the party that are complicit, Labour is, in what they've described as the murder of Palestinians in the Gaza conflict.
So loony lefties, or do they have a point, and what might they do next? Who better to tell us than Charlie Peters, our reporter who broke the story of how Youth Demand came about last week. This is Labour paying a price here for its stance on war in Gaza, refusing to back an unconditional ceasefire.
And you've just heard the Youth Demand position on that stance. But they're more than just a pro-Palestinian group. They're also an environmentalist outfit. They take on what they describe as two concurrent genocides. They say they're campaigning against activism in the Rosebank in Scotland to the West Bank in Palestine.
Rosebank being the oil field.
That's right. So they're campaigning against Tory oil licences, using their languages, and they're also campaigning against a two-way arms embargo on sales to Israel. But I can reveal that in the next hour, I anticipate that the next action from Youth Demand will occur. So they struck yesterday at Labour Party HQ. They won't say where they're going to do something today, but they have told me in the last 10 minutes that their actionists, as they describe their activists, will be conducting another protest on the streets of London in the next hour.
Got a hunch?
I think central London. I think it could be. We saw Labour being hit yesterday.
The Tory
party. It could be the Tory party today. They are very specific when they mention the Tory oil licences in their campaigning, so it could be the same again. And I have to stress that every time I speak to activists from Youth Demand, the group that we revealed last week, they always stress how they feel as though democracy has failed, and they don't think that they can vote their way out of what they describe as these concurrent and ongoing crises. So they say that the only way to deal with it is that kind of behaviour.
Saying, people were listening on the radio, they actually were inside the Labour Party HQ too with great red spray guns.
Like a fire extinguisher of
and they're causing huge damage. It's going to be quite an expensive bill for Labour.
I would just be so ashamed if that was my young 20-year-old or whatever they are. What an utter disgrace. Look, that's just pure criminal damage. Did anybody get arrested for this, Charlie?
Yeah, 11 arrests yesterday. But as far as I understand, the group is made up of low hundreds of numbers of activists. So there could be a fresh round, a fresh cell sent out today for that next demonstration.
Honestly. Let's talk to Lord Walney now, former Labour MP, government's advisor on political violence and disruption, and friend of the show. Good to see you again, Lord Walney. What's your response? I had a very emotional response watching those activists destroy the inside of that building, the damage that they cause. What's your response?
Yeah, the level of criminal destruction is depressing, and I think we have to be careful as broadcasters, as politicians, as commentators, not to end up amplifying what is on one level pretty basic criminal damage. And I think there is a risk actually that we can talk about this in excited tones and they're going to strike next, and end up having GB News and other channels as essentially a microphone, a loudhailer for this pretty unedifying far left group. So I think that's one thing to be mindful of. It's interesting that this, my understanding, and your correspondent has done some good work on this. Has shown the move of what is essentially an environmental group into campaigning for Palestine, and that shows firstly the level of interchange on the far left, I think, between the militant environmental campaigning and the Gaza protests. And also, I think it shows a level of cynicism from these environmental campaigners who have been, I think, frustrated that their actions in blocking roads have not been getting the publicity that they hoped that it would because of the dominance of the Gaza protests in recent months, that they have essentially moved onto that turf to try to get a look in through combining
Interesting. To piggyback that attention.
But Lord Warney, do you think can they go too far? Is that what they've done today? Did you just say, was it too much, too extreme?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we need to be really firm as a country at all levels, at the political level, in the way that the public discuss this. That whatever your strength of feeling about a cause, stepping into criminality and vandalism is not acceptable, that we need more of a focus on how to change the law through the ballot box and be proud of the parliamentary democracy that they have, and not buy into this fake far left narrative which says, oh well, all democracy is irredeemably corrupted and therefore we've got to take matters into our own hands.
Yeah,
that's not acceptable.
I just want to put your point to Charlie Peters here. Are you amplifying this and sensationalising it and giving them publicity that, frankly, could be have a negative impact for all of us?
Sure. Well, when we revealed this new alliance, this group last week between Palestine Action and this Just Stop Oil spin-off, it didn't appear that the police or ministers were aware of this group. So I'd push back on a view that perhaps we're amplifying it, more that actually we're revealing this group where many critics are saying that insufficient action has been taken to counter these groups and actually to get proactive and preemptive with policing to infiltrate these groups, which have sprung up out of the ground very suddenly. I mean, this organisation didn't really exist until the middle of the last month, and it's only by virtue of investigating left-wing online spaces that we were able to reveal that. Well, the funding is very interesting. We do know that a lot of these activists, certainly the ones that I've met on the street, are young students, so there's no doubt they're revealing student finance to subsidise their activities in the middle of the week. To
kind of be funding their university education.
Well, precisely. But a lot of them that I've spoken to have kind of delayed studies in order to come out and take part in these protests. One of the people who was outside of Labour Party HQ yesterday was an Oxford University student. I spoke to another one who was studying critical theory at Leeds. So
thought these people were supposed to be clever.
They're middle class, they're well off. Many critics say they're extremely entitled. Others are saying that they are anti-democratic vandals. But one thing is for sure, is they are not getting the level of police oversight that many critics expect they should.
Well, they're trying to put meaning in their otherwise meaningless lives, it seems, doesn't it? And causing disruption in the way. Lord Walney, thank you so much for joining us. I'm afraid we're short of time this morning. And Charlie Peters as well, thank you so much. It is a dilemma for us as broadcasters, isn't it, how much publicity you give to that?
Yeah, but if they're a campaigning group, we've got a job to tell people about them. We need to do. That's our job.
And where are the police? Get there, arrest them, bang them up.
Well, they've arrested them, but a bit late.
Right, we've got to go to the weather. Don't go anywhere. See you in a minute.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, it's feeling much cooler out there today than yesterday. There are rain and wind warnings in force, but it will turn somewhat drier this evening. That's as this area of low pressure, which will bring some persistent rain to some through the rest of the day, gets replaced by this ridge of higher pressure through this evening and overnight. But before then, some very persistent rain to come for many areas of northern England, much of Scotland as well. There is a rain warning in force for southern areas of Scotland, so there could be some disruption from the rainfall. The winds are also going to be very strong everywhere across the UK, but in particular across the west coast of Wales, northwest England as well. So it's going to be feeling particularly chilly exposed to that wind. But across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and into southern England, it should be drier with a chance of some sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon. Overnight tonight, the low pressure pushes away and it turns dry and clear for the bulk of the UK overnight. But that will allow temperatures to fall away. So it's going to be a chillier night than of late, with a touch of frost expected for parts of Scotland as well as northern England. However, from the west, we'll start to see cloud thicken through Wednesday morning, so Northern Ireland will likely see a bit of a wetter start. That rain will spread into South Wales, the southwest through the first hours of the morning, and then elsewhere across the country later on. So after a brighter start, you'll likely see some rain and cloudier skies later on in the day. The rain will turn quite persistent across western areas of Scotland as well, and here there's a rain warning in force, but it does introduce much milder air, so it will be a warmer day.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 9th of April. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us. So, Bradford murder arrest. Police have arrested a 25-year-old man from Oldham on suspicion of murder in Aylesbury after a mother, Kulsuma Akhtar, was stabbed to death in Bradford.
And he's the real-life Mr Bates versus the Post Office. He's there, Alan Bates, giving evidence at the public inquiry into the Post Office scandal for the first time. He says the Post Office ended his contract because of issues he raised with them over the dodgy, faulty Horizon IT system.
And that picture was his statement as opposed to him. Now, tackling tax dodgers to fund the NHS. It's a radical plan, but Labour claim they can fund the health service and education by clamping down on those who don't pay tax. Do you think it's that easy?
Yes, Labour are planning to spend $500 million to get more compliance officers into HMRC. They reckon they can claw back some $5 billion a year by the end of Parliament. It's the sort of thing that incoming governments tend to pledge. Much easier said than done.
Stop rushing kids to change gender. A landmark new report will reveal children who believe they are transgender may actually have mental health issues. So is it time we stop forcing kids to make these potentially life-changing decisions?
And it was a total solar eclipse. Millions of people across Mexico, America and Canada got to see the rare event last night. We'll be talking to one of them. Well, I
looked out my window.
Did I?
And it was hopeless.
It was just...
Well, it was cloud.
Cloud. An absolute bank of cloud.
There were certain parts of the UK where you could see a bit of it, I think. But I think we have to wait till 2090 to have a full eclipse, which we can see here.
Good luck.
I'm not sure I'll be around.
No, maybe me neither.
GB News will be.
Yeah, and to be honest, my other half and I went for a walk. It was sunset. It was lovely, beautiful sunset. And I still would be able to see the eclipse in a couple of hours. And then we looked out the window and it was just cloudy. And do you know what he said? He said, I'll just watch it on the telly. Which, frankly, is advice for life, right? Now, gbnews.com/your say is the email this morning if you want to let us know what you think. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Police say they have arrested a suspect in a murder investigation after a mother was stabbed to death while pushing her baby in a pram. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed on Westgate in Bradford. Police then launched a manhunt to search for a suspect. A 25-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder. Meanwhile, murder squad detectives are investigating after a woman was found stabbed to death in central London. The victim was discovered dead, having suffered multiple stab wounds in her home near Hyde Park. The Metropolitan Police say they are working 24/7 to identify and arrest whoever may be responsible for the attack. The Post Office Horizon public inquiry has resumed almost 4 years after it began, with campaigner Alan Bates making his first appearance. The inquiry has been probing the circumstances that led the Post Office to wrongly prosecute more than 900 sub-postmasters caused by errors in the Horizon software system. Mr Bates is giving his version of events ahead of appearances by senior executives from the Post Office and Fujitsu, which built the computer software at the heart of the scandal.
When Horizon came in, I think I was quite positive about it because I knew what technology and these sorts of systems could do. So I was quite positive. But I found it a bit frustrating once the system was installed and we were operating. I found there were many shortcomings in the system. And knowing what these systems could do, it just seemed a bit of a lost opportunity.
Labour are set to announce a new crackdown on tax avoiders today in a bid to help fund the NHS. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will pledge to raise over £5 billion per year, which Labour would use to tackle NHS waiting lists and fund free school breakfast clubs. The party has said it will also raise £2.6 billion over the next Parliament by closing loopholes in the government's plans to abolish exemptions for non-doms. Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray says it's wrong that some people are getting away without paying what they owe.
We're setting out our plans today to crack down on that tax avoidance and to get that money into the public purse, because, you know, when people right across Britain are paying more and more tax, we think it's wrong that a minority are getting away without paying what they owe. We've been setting out for a number of years about ending non-dom tax status. The government said they wanted to follow our lead after years of saying they wouldn't. But they're leaving open loopholes in that, which means that people can avoid paying hundreds of millions of pounds of tax. So we want to close those loopholes. But that's part of a broader approach to investment in HMRC.
In other news, the Foreign Secretary has met Donald Trump in Florida as he looks to shore up support for Ukraine. Lord Cameron's meeting with Mr Trump follows reports claiming the former US president said he could end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours if re-elected. The two men discussed the war in Ukraine, NATO and the Middle East. It is the first summit between a senior government minister and the former president since he left office in 2021. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary will hold talks with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington, D.C. The Tory MP at the centre of the Westminster honey trap has reportedly resigned from his position as the vice chair of the 1922 committee. It follows William Bragg claiming he was manipulated into sharing other politicians' personal numbers as part of a Westminster sexting scam. He has since apologised, prompting the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to call him courageous for coming forward. Scotland Yard says it's continuing its investigation into the scam after major security concerns were raised by several members of Parliament. The government says up to £11 million from water company fines will be reinvested into schemes to improve waterways and wetlands. The Water Restoration Fund, which is now opened for applications, will offer grants to local groups, charities, farmers and landowners to help them improve rivers, lakes and streams where illegal pollution has occurred. It's the latest move by the government to crack down on water company pollution in the face of growing public anger over the state of England's rivers and coastal waters. And campaigners are calling on the government to ban 25 pesticides which contain so-called forever chemicals after the potentially harmful toxins were found in more than half of food and drink samples. PFA chemicals, long-lasting toxins which have been linked to serious health issues, were found in more than 3,300 samples tested by the UK government in 2022. Out of all the items tested, strawberries were found to be the worst affected, as 95% of those tested samples contained PFAs. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
It's 11:07, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So just to recap that breaking news from earlier this morning, West Yorkshire Police have confirmed that a 25-year-old man has been arrested in Aylesbury on suspicion of the murder of 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar in Bradford on Saturday.
Now, in other news, Labour's pledging a £5 billion crackdown on tax dodgers to fund the party's pledges for NHS and school breakfast clubs.
Meanwhile, pressure is continuing to mount on Deputy Leader Angela Rayner to come clean on her tax affairs relating to her second home. She has, of course, denied any wrongdoing.
We're joined us now with Senior Politics Editor at the New Statesman, George Eaton. George, morning to you.
Morning.
I wonder if it was good politics to announce a major crackdown on tax avoidance by Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, when there are still ongoing questions as to whether the Deputy Labour leader may have taken part in some tax avoidance of her own.
Good question. I think Labour will certainly regard the coincidence of timing as unfortunate, but I doubt many voters are really across the details of the Angela Rayner story. And with this move, Rachel Reeves is filling the black hole that was left after Jeremy Hunt poached Labour's plans to abolish non-dom status, to extend the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. And we know that cracking down on tax avoidance is popular with the public, and Labour has to reassure them that it knows how it's going to fund its spending pledges. So I think they were still right to make this move, even if the Angela Rayner story, as you say, is an unfortunate distraction for them.
And I wonder, George, if it is cutting through more perhaps than people think, because it's just been revealed that Labour has cancelled the delivery of 21 Facebook ads featuring Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, because perhaps the focus groups or whatever, however they check these things, are showing that actually it is cutting through, because it's not about whether she owed £1,500 or £3,000 on a capital gains on the sale of that house. It's, is she telling the truth?
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see where this story goes when Parliament returns from recess next week. It is uncomfortable for Labour. Angela Rayner is obviously deputy leader and has been one of the party's most prominent media performers. Keir Starmer, David Lammy have been asked about the story in recent days. So I think it's a judgment call for Labour. At the moment, the line from Keir Starmer is that Angela Rayner said that the legal advice was that she did not owe capital gains tax. There's a judgment call for Labour as to whether they offer more transparency on that. I think it really depends how effective the Conservatives are at prolonging this story.
Are you uncomfortable with this, George? With the fact that it doesn't appear that... I mean, she is known for being direct, straight-talking, blunt. That is her appeal, and yet she's been almost hidden from view. And it does seem, if she'd been a bit more transparent at the beginning, this probably could have gone away 6 weeks ago.
It's a complicated one because the real question is what was the main residence for tax purposes, regardless of her daily comings and goings between different properties. This is an incredibly sort of intricate and complex area of tax law. So it's really, as I said, judgment call for Labour. Do they offer greater transparency over it by offering more detail or even publishing the legal advice in full, or do they try and tough it out? And it helps to state the obvious that on any given day there are innumerable problems for the government. Rishi Sunak has never been more unpopular. We're obviously coming up to the local elections where the Conservatives are expected to suffer very bad results. So I think, although the Angela Rayner story is a problem, it would be much more of a problem if Labour didn't have a poll lead of about 20 points and the Conservatives weren't incredibly divided. That will make it easier for them to try to turn the political focus elsewhere over the next few weeks.
I'm looking at our messages coming in here on our GB News website, George, and I think the deputy leader, the Angela Rayner story, sorry, I don't think is going to move anyone's vote, as it were. I don't think if you were a Labour fan, the idea that Angela Rayner might have dodged 1,500 quid in tax a few years ago is going to make any difference as to where you place your vote. But do you think this announcement by Rachel Reeves about tax is the kind of big issue that might affect people's votes, particularly, I suppose, if you are a wealthy person?
Yes, well, I think a few things on this. It's the economy is going to be a huge issue at the next election, so it's essential for Labour to explain how it's going to pay for its spending plans. When people are feeling squeezed from the cost of living crisis and also worried about the state of public services, I think they will like the idea that Labour is raising more from tax avoiders. It will be, of course, the move to close loopholes will be unpopular with some, but in general, tax rises are popular with the public, although they do prefer if they're paid by the wealthy rather than them. So here's an issue I think is how much of this will affect small businesses? How much are they going to have to jump through more hoops? Now that's a more thorny issue, perhaps, because it's very easy to talk about cracking down on tax avoidance by large companies, but what about smaller businesses? A more complex area.
George, you and I have been around the political bloc quite a few times. If I had £1 for every time I've written crack down on offshore tax havens, crack down on tax avoidance, crack down on tax evasion, and very rarely does the money come in that they expect. And I've seen the Institute of Fiscal Studies are being very sceptical about Rachel Reeves' forecast it will bring in £5 billion. Do you share their scepticism?
Look, you're exactly right that there are two things parties love to say. One is we'll raise more for tax avoidance. The other is favourite is efficiency savings. Now, I think it's an ambitious target. I don't think it's entirely implausible because The National Audit Office, obviously independent, has said you could raise $6 billion by closing the tax gap. But it's ambitious. To raise $5 billion by the end of Parliament, you're going to have to recruit more. I think Labour's talking about 5,000 extra workers, where they're going to have to be recruited. They're going to have to be trained. It's complex raising and raising more,
really
more in these areas.
And the HMRC figures Labour said, the gap between the amount of tax owed and what the government actually collects is 36 billion. That was 21 to 22. 36 billion sounds like a lot of money. It's actually what we paid to create the useless track and trace app. That was 36 billion. But it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much money. Like, I know that sounds ridiculous. 36 billion, how far would that go in the NHS? Not that far.
Well, I think 36 billion would make quite a difference in the NHS. I mean, this budget's about 200 billion. So I mean, but they're not talking about 36 billion. I think they said it's gone up by 5 billion in the last relevant year.
Right.
So what they're trying to do is say they're trying to narrow the wider tax gap that's supposed. But it's still ambitious because, as we know, there's an entire industry devoted to finding new loopholes and new ways to avoid tax. So it is a bit of a game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
And the question is, can Labour really get enough people in place to raise 5 billion by the end of the Parliament? As I said, it's ambitious. I don't think it's necessarily implausible.
She, of course, George, will be an historic figure, because it's pretty damn clear that Labour will win the next election, and comfortably. She will be our first ever woman Chancellor of the Exchequer. Will that make any difference to the way the Treasury is run, do you think? Because it's often been seen as a very white Oxbridge old boys club.
Yes, that's a good question. I think Rachel Reeves will be more sensitive to issues around gender. Look, I'm sure childcare is going to be a big issue for the next Labour government. I'm sure she will want to prioritise incentivising incentives for women to return to work. I'm sure she'll look at issues like the gender pay gap, gender audits, and so on. In terms of how she'll shake up the Treasury, well, there's going to be she's made growth the priority for the next Labour government. So it'll be interesting if she tries to take a more radical approach in terms of investment, in terms of saying, look, let's be less cautious. If we really think that the investment will ultimately generate growth and pay for itself in a sense, then let's abandon the what you might call the sort of Treasury conservatism around that. But I think the Treasury would be delighted to have Rachel Reeves, because she's a former Bank of England economist. She's very much on the same page as them, and they'll certainly be more comfortable with her than they were with, say, Kwasi Kwarteng, who sacks the head of the Treasury, Tom Scholar. I think they'll be happy with Rachel Reeves as Chancellor.
All right, thank you, George. Great to see you. Senior politics editor at the New Statesman, George Eaton there. Now, me and Andrew strongly agree on this one. The government...
Disagree.
Sorry. I can't even agree on what I'm saying.
Heaven's sake.
Very windy in the night last night. Kept me up most of the night. Right, me and Andrew strongly disagree on this one. The government has backed the decision to let Russian athletes compete at Paris in 2024. Quite right, too. Those poor athletes aren't the ones dropping the bombs. We'll debate that next with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
There is a kind of a Mediterranean side to that as well, because my mother came from that side, a big family. And I think there is that sense of community where family is kind of key. And I think that's really kind of what we sort of try and continue, really. I mean, certainly with children and stuff like that, Sunday lunches were always, the big thing.
Yeah,
really.
If you go down the Old Kent Road today...
Very different. Very different, yeah. And that was quite some time ago as well, because we were very close to where the Thomas Becket was.
Yeah, I know. The boxing upstairs and all the rest of it. Yep.
And I did go down there not so long ago, actually, and it really is very, very different. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. I think we have a different view of things.
Most people in London, Nicky, don't even know the names of the next-door neighbours.
No, true.
We've completely lost that sense of community that you grew up with, that you knew. I think it's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say sometimes I'm a bit guilty of it where I am now as well. You live in big houses, and I do see my neighbours, but, you know, it's not quite the same as it was back.
Now, I guess from that background, you were a teenager, you want to become a hairdresser.
Yeah,
that must have been quite a difficult call.
Yeah, that one was a really good call. My dad went, "Oh God, what?" I mean, it was just very funny, and certainly from the point of view of, you know, this was the early 70s, so it wasn't really the choice of most people would do.
No, but you did. Why?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I went to a grammar school, and I didn't do as well in the final exams, and I was kind of forced into sort of leaving, and you suddenly go, no idea what to do here, really.
Yeah.
But the idea of doing something in fashion, and, you know, I really I know that I was given some really good advice, actually, by somebody that said, just start at the bottom. Don't necessarily go to, you know, college or whatever. Not that there may not be anything wrong with those, but just start at the bottom, go to the best place you can and start sweeping the floor.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:21 is Britain's News on GB News, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. And now a man and woman have been charged, this is breaking news, with the murder of Sarah Mayhew, whose remains were found in a South London park last Tuesday.
Gemma Saundercock and Steve Sampson will appear in custody at Bromley Magistrates Court later today.
Her body disappeared. She disappeared about 2 years ago. Now we're joined by GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and GB News presenter Emily Carver's here, doing a bit of extra.
Doing a little bit extra for you.
Yeah,
why not?
very nice.
Consider this research for this afternoon.
Well, exactly. It'll help me.
Lord Ranger vanished. He was with doing the papers earlier.
It's a busy lord.
Yeah.
He's a busy lord.
Right, now, do we want to talk about council fat cats, Nigel? What is this about? There's a headline on the front page of the Telegraph here that council staff now earning more than £100,000 a year.
Yeah, it's a survey that that thousands of them are earning this kind of money. 188 of them are earning more than £165,000 a year.
That's more than the PM.
Which is more than the Prime Minister gets. Question really is whether you think the job of a chief executive at a council is a really big job or not.
Not as big a job as Prime Minister.
Well, the thing is, but our Prime Minister has a weird kind of low wage.
Yeah.
If you compare that with, I was looking up some other countries, that Macron over in France gets £174,000, Biden gets £315,000. The Prime Minister beats Spain. The Spanish Prime Minister only gets £77,000.
I think the Prime Minister in Singapore gets something like £700,000.
Well, there you go, yeah.
Nice.
And the Chinese leader who's got billions of people to look after, £20,000.
I think it's probably a bit of extra for the Chinese president.
Yeah,
somehow.
well, I think the problem is that, yes, council tax is going up across the board nearly in most councils. But also, how many stories have we read about council chief executives driving their councils into bankruptcy, the inefficiencies that we all have to deal with, the tax rises, the incompetence, the potholes. But there is an argument that you accept market rates when it comes to the private sector. So is this the market rate? Is this what council chiefs, if they are doing a good job, deserve?
Emily, there's the difference with the market. The market, though, would kick out the useless, inefficient chief executive of a private company, whereas we get stuck with the useless chief executive of a local council.
I have no problem with people working hard and making a good salary. But let me give you an example. The highest remunerated staff member identified in this analysis, departing official from Hampshire Council, which was warned it may go bankrupt this year, and has already announced cuts to museums, waste tips and services. That's what makes people's blood boil.
It does. I mean, I'm sure people get really angry about it.
They do.
And especially if your council is not doing the job it's meant to do.
Yeah. Collecting the rubbish.
Yeah, well, I mean...
Which is how most of us... is our first point of call.
Yeah, and I mean, local authorities, the big things is the 3 Ps, which is planning, potholes and parking. That's what local residents care about.
Yes.
And we want to make sure we've got all those things in order.
And bins.
And getting the bins collected more than twice a week, twice a fortnight.
God, where do you live? We're lucky if we have it once a fortnight.
Yeah, and we get our bins every week. Still, we're very lucky, I think, in our council.
Yeah.
But again, I think that Bev made that point. It is the rate for the job, and it's very difficult to see just to compare it to the Prime Minister, who is not paid the rate for the job. He's paid well under that. That these people are paid for the rate for the job. Whether they're good enough at it is a different matter.
I think the problem is when councils go towards bankruptcy, they often call upon central government to bail them out, and then we all have to suffer as a result of mismanagement.
Right, Russia sending athletes to the Olympics this year, Nigel, in Paris.
So dishonest, this.
Well,
they're not called Russia. What do they call them?
Well, they're individual athletes.
Yeah.
They're actually neutral athletes.
But they'll put it under a different flag, don't they? Yes, called this federation of something.
There is a neutral flag. So, for instance, the way that this is going to work is that they have a neutral flag. They don't represent their countries. When they get a medal, the country doesn't get the medal, the athlete does. And if they stand on the podium, there is what they call a neutral national anthem with no words. So it's not the Russian
Yes, it's very bland. But also, they're investigated in the run-up as well to check that they're not supportive of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I believe.
Yeah.
So they're checked on those grounds too, yes.
How can you check that, though? What
if they've got links?
Social media posts and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Does it matter?
If you've banned a country from international sport, that means the athletes are banned too, and the football teams and the cricket teams. There's no half measure, and you have to think about how powerful the sporting ban was over apartheid.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the only reason we've changed our stance, last time round we said, no, they mustn't compete.
Yeah.
But, of course, that we did change our stance over Wimbledon. So last year that Russian and Belarusian athletes were allowed, tennis players were allowed to actually appear there. So it's kind of... As a compromise goes, it's not the athletes' fault necessarily that Ukraine's been invaded, and should they then be banned from... I mean,
Andrew, do you think they should be banned altogether? So no neutral flag, no jade green flag, no...
No, and you see, whatever it is, Putin will take credit if they win medals. He will say it's a Russian victory, it's a victory of the Russian state. It doesn't matter if they've got a neutral flag.
But how much of a sanction is it, really? I mean, it's had absolutely zero impact thus far. Does it really make a difference, or is it about virtue signalling from countries who want to show that they disapprove?
I usually disapprove of virtue signalling, but on some things I think you have to.
You like a bit of virtue signalling on this one.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And the bottom line is they've probably got better sports facilities in Russia than we have here anyway, than most of the European countries anyway. Right, shall we talk about David Cameron? What's he been up to, Emily?
Well, he's meeting Donald Trump. Now, he's the first British government minister to meet Donald Trump at such a summit since the president left office.
To be a fly on the wall because they despise each other.
Yeah, so he's apparently going to be very much telling Donald Trump that the Republicans need to stop blocking aid to Ukraine, more money to NATO. Well, he's going to be recommitting our stance with regards to NATO. And it'll be interesting to hear, if we do get to hear, what's said about the Middle East.
Yeah.
What is Trump's position with regards to what's going on in Gaza?
And I wrote about this a long time ago, Nigel. When he was Prime Minister, he made it absolutely clear to his ministers, you don't have anything relationship with Trump because he was backing Hillary Clinton winning, even though she was the Democrat.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I think in a situation like this, it's quite right he should go across and meet him because he's likely to be the next president of the United States. I mean, I was in the House of Commons when Obama came across and met Cameron when he was the leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
Having already met Gordon Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown was very upset about it.
That's right.
He'd gone to see Cameron, but it is right, you actually do that. And of course, Cameron has met the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
Yeah.
They're talking about Israel and Gaza, talking about Ukraine. So it seems right that he should actually do these things.
I guess the question is, though, I mean, some people are saying it goes against protocol. I'm not sure the government is insisting this is normal. But whether he will actually have any impact on what Donald Trump will do with regards to aid to
Trump
Ukraine.
He's only going to be Foreign Secretary for about 5 more minutes, because it's then going to be, God help us,
I have a
David
theory
Lammy.
that David Cameron will be Prime Minister again.
Oh, no.
As if by magic,
It's
Tom
just
Holland has appeared at the end of this.
Hello.
Damn
Lovely
that.
to see
Sorry
you.
we had to
At the
borrow
other
your
end
coat.
of the table at the
Sorry we
moment.
had to
We want a Tory Prime
steal your
Minister,
coat.
Emily, not David Cameron.
It's interesting, though, what Cameron's saying to Trump, or has said earlier on, is borders matter. And he's trying to sell the idea to Trump of protecting the integrity of international borders, not just the borders of Ukraine, but the southern border of the United States, the English Channel, trying to feed it into this whole narrative that actually sometimes it's worth spending money to protect the integrity of international borders. That might be a language that Donald Trump can understand.
Well, Donald Trump will probably say, I can't believe that you're lecturing me on borders when it's the thing that I feel most strongly about, surely. He'll be like, what can you teach me with your migrants?
He'll probably
coming
say,
across the Channel?
I'll solve the southern border first, is probably what he'll say.
He'll be like,
But there's
"Thanks,
this
Cameron."
idea that there could be an omnibus bill where funding for Ukraine is put in with funding for fixing the southern border in the United States. Although there has been a lot of controversy over that, given that Trump was apparently ringing round rebellious Republican congressmen, trying to get them to block funding for fixing the southern border in the United States until after he became president.
Oh, what skullduggery. What else is on the show
Well, if
today,
that's
you
true,
two?
that is outrageous, because one would like to believe that Trump worried most about the security of
he worries
the
most about
United
himself.
States, but clearly not so much.
Does he want Biden to claim the win,
What else
though?
is on our show? What else is on our
much
show?
is on our
Angela
show.
Rayner.
Oh, my goodness. New polling. I don't know if you've seen it. New polling out today showing that more than 2/3 of the public do want Angela Rayner to release the advice she's received on tax.
Turns out people care.
Turns out people care. Only 16% of people think that she should continue to hide this advice from Keir Starmer and from the public
story,
at large.
Tom, that 20-odd Facebook ads in featuring Angela Rayner have been pulled by the Labour Party?
Oh, really?
It's not a story that's going away. And the
No.
irony here is that if at the start of all of this she'd have just said, look, I
agree.
got in a muddle, I
agree.
registered the wrong home,
This was a while
I'll pay
ago.
back some tax.
I agree.
This wouldn't have been a story that went on for weeks.
This has gone on for 6 weeks.
OK, and you will be going on for 3 hours from midday this afternoon. Right, and Nigel Nelson,
Always
thank
a
you as
joy.
well for your input. It is time very quickly for your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. It's 11:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your headlines. Police say they have arrested a suspect in a murder investigation after a mother was stabbed to death while pushing her baby in a pram. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed on Westgate in Bradford. Police then launched a manhunt to search for a suspect. A 25-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder. Meanwhile, murder squad detectives are investigating after a woman was found stabbed to death in central London. The victim was discovered dead, having suffered multiple stab wounds in her home near Hyde Park. The Metropolitan Police say they are working 24/7 to identify and arrest whoever may be responsible for the attack. 6 migrants have been injured in the latest wave of violence in northern France as people smugglers clashed with migrants trying to force their way onto small boats without paying. The latest violence erupted on a beach near Dunkirk and resulted in at least 2 of the migrants being stabbed multiple times. The incident was followed by more violence in the same area just a short time later when police came under attack from a large group of migrants who threw stones, bottles and other missiles at the officers. And the Post Office Horizon public inquiry has resumed today, almost 4 years after it began, with campaigner Alan Bates making his first appearance. The inquiry has been probing the circumstances that led the Post Office to wrongly prosecute more than 900 sub-postmasters caused by errors in the Horizon software system. Mr Bates has told the inquiry his search for justice and redress was something you couldn't put down. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2689 and €1.1674. The price of gold is £1,860 and 33 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,948 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
All over my suit.
Andrew Pierce is telling me about somebody sending him a pot of jam. Right, have you heard about the fancy new way you can get in touch with GB News?
If it was you, by the way, it ruined my suit.
We'd love to hear what you think. Go on to gbnews.com/you'll-say. Here's a much more professional presenter telling you all about it.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/you'll-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/you'll-say.
So you've got roughly 3 minutes to get your comments in. Oh, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Thanks for the jam.
It was April.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Can the Church of England not spend their money as they wish?
The Church of England can do amazing things for this country and for the world, and I'm not sure why it's chosen to focus on this specific issue. You know, one of the causes that I've always thought the Church was very good at were things called almshouses, which were basically houses that would be built on church estates for the needy. Not only did they want to spend £100 million on this fund, that they wanted to spend £1 billion on reparations as well. Well, why not spend 100 million or £1 billion on a new generation of almshouses, as opposed to just helping one group of people, black British people? Why not just help all people in need?
Alex?
Well, I just don't understand what the Church of England is trying to do. It's on its deathbed.
Congregations have reduced. I mean, deathbed is maybe...
Look, if we look over 20 years, it's dramatically lower than it used to be. And a lot of criticism from actual Christians come from the values that the Church of England are now propagating. And Justin Welby has a lot to answer for, because, you know, not only are we seeing in the news this mass conversion of illegal immigrants to a gay mass system in the UK, but now we're seeing them spending money... And as Albie actually pointed out correctly, in a way that doesn't really benefit broader society, it benefits a very small group of people. So I just don't know where it's going to end. This committee has also said £1 billion's not enough. It's 100 million, sorry.
Church commissioners are now hoping for a target of £1 billion.
I mean, it's woke nonsense, isn't it?
You could make the argument that this is charity. Justin Welby's job is to be a virtue signaller, is it not?
Should charity discriminate? I mean, that's what he's saying. We're only going to give this to people from a specific skin colour or background. I don't think that's very Christian of them.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:38 with Britain's News on GB News, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Lots of people getting in touch, but we've got some breaking news.
Yeah, some breaking news. First Minister Humza Yousaf's brother-in-law has been charged with abduction and extortion. This is following an incident where a man fell from a block of flats and later died. Is Ramsey Al-Nakla. He's 36 and he's expected to appear at Dundee Sheriff Court later today.
That's Humza, who's the First Minister of Scotland. Yeah. Interesting.
Absolutely. Right, we're looking at your comments here. Now, you might have heard us giggling and laughing then, because Andrew was telling me a story about when a reader of his newspaper sent him a pot of jam.
Apricot.
Now, well, Adrian has got in touch and said, I hope it was raspberry or blackcurrant jam and not strawberry. They could have sent you some scones as well, Andrew.
No, it was apricot.
And it went all down your suit, didn't it?
It did. And it did. And the suit was pretty much ruined. Thanks very much for the jam, though. Nice thought. If you're watching.
And we've been talking about Angela Rayner, and Tom Harwood has just come in and given us an interesting statistic on how many people think that she should release her tax returns. And Paul has said, Bev, that's me, rejects any impact from the tax controversy facing Labour's deputy leader. In her view, people will still back the party. But Paul says many on low incomes and from working class roots will disagree. Rayner's decision to buy a council house took a public asset from her community. As millions lack affordable good housing, no one should vote for the red Tories. That's a really interesting take.
Yeah, it is. My issue with her again and again is this. Look, she is she's gritty, tough, outspoken, calls it as it is, was the first called the Tories scum, always calling on Tories. Boris had to resign over a cake, for God's sake, at a party.
She made such a lot of that, didn't she?
Didn't she? And here we are. She's not been transparent about whether she was or should or shouldn't have paid capital gains tax when she sold that home, when her husband had a house up the flipping road. Where was she living? The neighbours say she's lying, and Keir Starmer says he doesn't need to see the information.
See, we were saying yesterday that we thought maybe it would play in her favour a little bit, because it does remind people that she she lived in a council house and that she was caring for her disabled child and that she was a tough working mum. In some ways that might resonate with the public, but I completely take the point, though, about the fact that people say, well, hang on a minute, I bought my council house and I had to pay my
you have to pay your tax. Whether it's... And people say, oh, it's only £1,500 or £2,000. It's not the point. They are going to be levelling taxes on us in a few months' time. And also David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, said it doesn't matter if you're in opposition, you don't have to be judged the same as if you're in government. I'm afraid you do. We all have to be judged the same. We all have to pay our taxes, and we shouldn't because if you don't pay them, you're breaking the law.
Mark has said in her possible future position as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves should not be focusing on issues surrounding women's needs just because she's a woman. The role of Chancellor of the Exchequer is not and should not be gender-specific, and that's about the fact that I think she's going to be providing breakfast clubs at schools. Now, I would say, Mark, that being a parent is not necessarily a woman's issue, and breakfast clubs also help men who are fathers who go to work. Just saying. And John says plenty of benefit claimants who should be made to work for the councils, doing whatever to match the benefits received. This will save a lot of money. It's the little things that compound.
A lot of people getting in touch about Russia and the fact that Britain is no longer raising an objection to Russian athletes taking part in the it's the Paris Olympics later. Phil says, keep politics out of sport, sick to death of having to bow to hurty people. Look what's happened to football and Formula 1 over the issue of taking the knee. But Paul says, while I agree with Bev that it's not athletes dropping the bombs, it's imperative Russia is ostracised from the world, and Russian people understand Putin has caused this while he continues attacking Ukraine. That's one of the points about the sporting ban. Russian people think, why haven't we got a Russian flag flying? Why isn't Russian national anthem playing? Because you're international prize, mate, because of your president.
Yeah, but Putin would just say, I am, the rest of the countries.
It won't stop him.
He would still spin that, I guess, in a different way. Right, I think we've come to the end of our show for today. Oh, no, we haven't. It's only quarter...
What is wrong with her? Up next, shall I step in here?
Go?
She obviously wants some apricot jam. Up next, North America, because we want to see that total solar eclipse last night was watched by millions across the US, Mexico and Canada. Beverly and I both peered up into the sky thinking we might see it here, but you know what? It was too cloudy. So we're going to go to Connecticut, although Bev might have gone because she thinks it's hope time. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, it's feeling much cooler out there today than yesterday. There are rain and wind warnings in force, but it will turn somewhat drier this evening. That's as this area of low pressure, which will bring some persistent rain to some through the rest of the day, gets replaced by this ridge of higher pressure through this evening and overnight. But before then, some very persistent rain to come for many areas of northern England, much of Scotland as well. There is a rain warning in force for southern areas of Scotland, so there could be some disruption from the rainfall. The winds are also going to be very strong everywhere across the UK, but in particular across the west coast of Wales, northwest England as well. So it's going to be feeling particularly chilly exposed to that wind. But across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and into southern England, it should be drier with a chance of some sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon. Overnight tonight, the low pressure pushes away and it turns dry and clear for the bulk of the UK overnight. But that will allow temperatures to fall away. So it's going to be a chillier night than of late, with a touch of frost expected for parts of Scotland as well as northern England. However, from the west, we'll start to see cloud thicken through Wednesday morning, so Northern Ireland will likely see a bit of a wetter start. That rain will spread into South Wales, the southwest through the first hours of the morning, and then elsewhere across the country later on. So after a brighter start, you'll likely see some rain and cloudier skies later on in the day. The rain will turn quite persistent across western areas of Scotland as well, and here there's a rain warning in force, but it does introduce much milder air, so it will be a warmer day.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel. I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Well, North America was dazzled, if that's the right word, I'm not sure it is, by a total solar eclipse last night that was watched by millions across the United States, Mexico and Canada.
So this rare event, which won't happen again for another 20 years, left a large ribbon of land in complete darkness as groups gathered to watch.
So exciting, isn't it? Well, joining us now to talk us through this is the engineer and wildlife scientist Daniel Gillies, who was camping out in the snow with his 2 dogs so he could see the eclipse. Well, morning to you. And I'm not quite sure what the time is where you are. How exciting was it, and was it worth camping out?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and good morning. It was extremely cold, below freezing, but it was an amazing experience.
Daniel, can you just explain to us, because obviously we didn't get to see it here, particularly because it was very, very cloudy at 8 o'clock last night. This is England, after all, the UK. What could you see? What happened?
Yeah. So we were able to see totality where we were located, like shown there in the photo. It started out a beautiful, perfectly clear, sunny day. As the moon moved in front of the sun, it began to get gradually darker. You could feel it getting colder. The wind began to pick up. And then eventually, once we hit totality, the best way I could describe it is it was sci-fi. It just looked completely otherworldly.
And what time of the day was that for you there in Connecticut?
So I was up in Vermont, in East Haven, and it was sometime around 3 o'clock in the afternoon at totality. And it went from daytime to dark. You could see stars, you could see prominences off the sun. It was just absolutely incredible.
And how long did it last for?
For where we were located, it was 2.5 minutes long.
Amazing. And how many of you were out watching?
There were probably about 50 or 60 people at the location that I was at. Maybe another handful that were camping. So a few other folks who braved it out as well.
And of course, you're not supposed to look at the event with your bare eyes, are you? You have to wear these special glasses, Daniel.
Yeah. So I had a pair of Eclipse glasses. I had a filter for my camera. Everyone out there looking a bit nerdy wearing the Eclipse glasses, but, you know, better safe than sorry. Once totality comes, though, you can take them off, and that's when you get that beautiful, beautiful view.
Right.
And Daniel, dogs and cats are very sensitive to weather changes and things. Were the dogs OK? Did they realise something was happening?
You know, my dogs were asleep. They slept right through the event. But some of the other dogs that were there at the event, there were a lot of them, got a little bit excited. But overall, the animals were pretty calm.
And what do you think it is about these sorts of events that captures the human imagination?
Oh, you know, I think one of the most amazing things is just how many of us are watching it together at one time. And to then get that image that can you imagine being through this event if you didn't have knowledge of what was going on? It's just unbelievable. So I think it's that unbelievable nature of it that really captivates people. It's something that you have to experience at least once in your life.
Yeah, and there are some people for whom this is being an eclipse chaser is a job. I was reading about one guy who took a short notice flight from Berlin in Germany via London to get to Montreal just to watch this.
It's amazing. More or less did the same thing on Saturday night. Packed up the car and decided which direction to go based on the weather. So it made a 10 or 12-hour drive up from Virginia to Vermont, pretty much at the last minute chasing the eclipse.
So would you go travelling to another country, Daniel, to watch an eclipse like that? Now you've seen this one.
Oh yeah, as long as you're there to go see totality, I would highly recommend it, and I would absolutely travel to go do this in the future.
Just makes you wonder. It's awesome, isn't it? The power of the moon and the sun.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? It you know, makes you realise how little and insignificant we are, Daniel, as well, doesn't it? That we kid ourselves that we're in charge of the universe. We're not.
Most definitely.
All right, thank you so much. Daniel Gillis there, who is an engineer and wildlife scientist who was joining us from
I'd go
Connecticut.
camping out. If I thought it was just a couple of 2 or 3 hours, I'd do that,
You wouldn't go camping if your life depended on it.
No, I wouldn't camp.
Oh, OK, that's what...
No, but I would drive somewhere. Or get
you
a
mean
train.
stay in a tent? I was
no, not doing it. I did it once.
Did you?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Right. Louise has got in touch on gbnews.com/your say, saying that she really enjoys GB News, especially Bev and Andrew. So thank you very much, Louise. And am I not the only one bizarrely awestruck? Only one not awestruck by the solar eclipse, says Dross. It gets a bit darker for a short time. That happens every night. Am I missing something?
No, I think it's quite awesome, actually.
When you see it like that.
It's almost spooky, really. It does feel like something out of TV.
Yeah. And Paul says, even enough about the eclipse. It lasted 2 to 4 minutes, depending on your location. On GB News, it has lasted 18 hours with 2 smiley emojis. Well, we quite like it, you know. It does make you realise...
That's the first time I've seen it properly.
Yeah, me too. And Matt said, Andrew, please get Bev a coffee and don't let her drive home, because I completely lost track of time.
She completely lost track of time.
The weather was very windy last night. Was that Storm Kathleen? Was it Kathleen that kept me awake all night?
I don't know what it's called. They have those stupid names, don't they?
And Robert has got in touch about whether Russian athletes should be in the Olympics, and he says ban the Russian athletes. The same people that object if Russia bombed the UK, they would say we can't bomb Russia as the people are not to blame. Russia is attacking another country. They should be banned from all sport.
I think that's absolutely right.
And Samantha said, thank you so much, GB News. You are a breath of fresh air. I think Bev and Andrew are completely crazy, but good fun. I'm enjoying listening to you.
Oh,
thank you.
Well, I think she's crazy. I'm sure I am.
We're all crazy in our own different ways. Talking of which,
yes,
Emily and Tom are up next for Good Afternoon Britain. 2 other people who are crazy, all in our own individual ways. But we are the GB News family. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30.
See you tomorrow.
Totally.
totally sane over here.
You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps.
It helps, it helps. It's coming up on the show. Labour are cracking down on tax dodging, but questions remain for the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. According to new polling, 2/3 of voters believe she should publish her tax advice. What do you think?
And when you break it down to Labour voters, it's still 62% of those voted for the Labour Party in the last election. They think she should publish her tax advice too.
People care
we'll be
about
asking
this
that
story.
question. It is. It does seem that this is a growing scandal. But another scandal in other news. Almost 200 council workers across the country now earn more than the Prime Minister. Is this a good use of your tax bills when it comes to council tax, which is of course rising this year?
And of course we'll be live at the Post Office inquiry because the superstar sub-postmaster is giving evidence. He will tell all about what exactly happened at the Post Office.
Yes,
all of that
Mr.
after your
Alan
weather.
Bates.
Mr. Alan Bates, yes.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, it's feeling much cooler out there today than yesterday. There are rain and wind warnings in force, but it will turn somewhat drier this evening. That's as this area of low pressure, which will bring some persistent rain to some through the rest of the day, gets replaced by this ridge of higher pressure through this evening and overnight. But before then, some very persistent rain to come for many areas of northern England, much of Scotland as well. There is a rain warning in force for southern areas of Scotland, so there could be some disruption from the rainfall. The winds are also going to be very strong everywhere across the UK, but in particular across the west coast of Wales, northwest England as well. So it's going to be feeling particularly chilly exposed to that wind. But across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and into southern England, it should be drier with a chance of some sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon. Overnight tonight, the low pressure pushes away and it turns dry and clear for the bulk of the UK overnight.